When you think of ancient Sparta, what comes to mind? Fierce warriors, the phalanx, King Leonidas shouting, "This is Sparta!" But behind the warriors stood someone else, someone just as crucial to Sparta's strength, though often forgotten in history: the women of Sparta. These were not secluded housewives like in Athens. These women owned land, managed businesses, commanded estates, and raised the warriors that terrified all of Greece. They were strong, independent, and unapologetically powerful. So powerful, in fact, that philosophers like Aristotle accused them of bringing Sparta to ruin. But the truth? Their autonomy made Sparta stronger than any other Greek city-state. This is the untold story of Spartan women, the most liberated women of the classical world. Spartan women versus Athenian women. Let's start with a comparison. In Athens, often praised as the birthplace of democracy, women had no voice in politics, almost no property rights, and were expected to stay indoors, weaving and raising children. They were essentially invisible in public life. In Sparta, things were radically different. Women could inherit property, own land, manage estates, and conduct business. They were educated, trained physically, and present in almost every aspect of public life. Scholar Paul Cartledge captures the difference perfectly. In Athens, heiresses, epikleroi, were just vessels to pass property to the next male heir. In Sparta, heiresses, patrouchoi, held the patrimony in their own right. That meant a Spartan woman wasn't just a caretaker of wealth, she was the wealth. Some Spartan women even became the wealthiest landowners in Greece. Aristotle's criticism, the philosopher Aristotle, was horrified. In his Politics, he ranted that Spartan women were too independent, too free, and that their power was to blame for Sparta's decline. To him, nature intended for men to rule, and Sparta had flipped that natural order. But Aristotle was writing from Athens, where women were voiceless. His criticism says more about Athenian fear of powerful women than about Spartan reality. In fact, evidence shows that women's autonomy made Sparta more efficient. When men were away at war, it was women who kept the farms, estates, and economy running. Without them, Sparta would have collapsed. Education and physical training. The foundation of this power lay in Lycurgus' reforms, the legendary Spartan lawgiver of the 9th century BCE. He created a society based on equality and military strength. Girls received the same physical training as boys. They wrestled, ran long and short distances, threw the discus and javelin, boxed, rode horses, and competed in races. They trained naked, just like the boys, in public festivals and competitions. Why? Because Lycurgus believed strong mothers would give birth to strong warriors. But training wasn't just physical. Girls learned music, dance, singing, and poetry, especially lyric poetry in the tradition of Sappho and Alcman. They performed in choruses, competing at festivals, praising gods, mocking unmarried men, and even celebrating same-sex love. One genre, the Parthenian, or maiden song, honored Artemis Orthia, but also gave women a voice to express desire, affection, and pride in their female community. For comparison, in Athens, girls stayed at home learning how to weave. In Sparta, they sang in choirs, sprinted across arenas, and composed poetry. Sexuality and marriage, Spartan views on love and sex were equally unconventional. Same-sex relationships, both male and female, were common and accepted. Plutarch writes that girls found lovers among older noble women, and these relationships were celebrated, not condemned. They built friendships, mentorships, and often lifelong bonds. Marriage itself was unusual. Instead of the Athenian model where girls married at 13 or 14, Spartan women often married at 18 or 20, stronger, more mature, more educated. The wedding ritual was shocking. After the families agreed, the bride was kidnapped, her head shaved, dressed in men's clothes, and hidden in a dark room. The husband would sneak in at night, consummate the marriage, and then return to his barracks. Sometimes, a man fathered several children before he ever saw his wife in daylight. The symbolism? Scholars suggest it was to ease men, who had lived surrounded by other men in the barracks, into intimacy with women. Spartan women as the walls of the city. Unlike most other Greek city-states, Sparta had no defensive walls. This was not an oversight, but a deliberate expression of Spartan confidence in the strength of its citizens. The walls of Sparta, it was said, were made of bronze and flesh, its warriors and their families. The Greek historian Thucydides and later writers record the famous saying that the walls of Sparta are its men. Yet other traditions expand this idea further. The women, too, were part of those living fortifications. Plutarch preserves accounts in which foreign envoys mocked the city for its lack of fortifications, only to be shown Spartan mothers and wives standing proudly and armed, with the retort, "These are the walls of Sparta." There are legendary episodes in which Spartan women directly defended the polis. One tale relates how, during a time when the Spartan army was away, enemy forces advanced toward the city. The women took up arms, organized the helots and younger boys, and stood ready to repel the attackers. Though the veracity of such stories cannot be fully proven, they reflect a cultural truth. Women were expected to be guardians of the community's honor no less than the men. Their training in discipline, their economic authority, and their indomitable spirit made them the symbolic, and sometimes literal, defenders of Sparta. By rejecting stone walls, Sparta projected the idea that its true strength lay not in passive defenses, but in the courage and unity of its citizens. In this symbolic framework, the women of Sparta were as essential to the city's security as its hoplite soldiers. Their presence reminded friend and foe alike that the Spartan way of life was a collective endeavor. Men fought abroad, but women maintained the home front, sustained the economy, raised future warriors, and, if necessary, stood ready to become the living ramparts of the city. Motherhood and fierce pride. Above all, Spartan women were mothers of warriors. Their duty wasn't simply to bear children. It was to raise brave citizens of Sparta. The goddess Eileithyia, associated with Artemis, presided over childbirth. Festivals and rituals celebrated fertility, motherhood, and the passage from maiden to wife. But Spartan motherhood came with fierce expectations. A famous story tells of a woman handing her son his shield before battle, telling him, "Return with it, or on it." In other words, come back victorious, or dead. Plutarch recounts the story of Gorgo, wife of King Leonidas. When asked why Spartan women were the only ones who ruled over their men, she replied, "Because we are the only women who give birth to real men." Some stories are darker. One woman, Demetria, was honored with an epigram for killing her son, who showed cowardice in war. For Spartans, honor was everything, even above family ties, responsibilities, and economic power. While men were away in war, women ran everything. They managed farms, estates, finances, and households. Helots, Sparta's subjugated class, did the manual labor, while women focused on administration and profit. Unlike Athens, where women couldn't appear in court, Spartan women could own, inherit, and control property directly. By the 4th century BCE, it's estimated that women controlled nearly 40% of all land in Sparta. They also played major roles in religion, leading cults of Artemis Orthia and Eileithyia, and honoring Cyniska, the first woman to win at the Olympic Games with her trained chariot horses. Appearance and culture: Spartan women dressed simply. They wore the peplos, a belted dress often drawn up to the knees, scandalizing conservative Greeks. Athenian writers mocked them for showing too much leg. Unmarried girls wore their hair long. Married women cut it short, another symbol of blending male and female roles. Though Lycurgus banned gold, silver, and cosmetics to enforce austerity, over time Spartan women wore jewelry, used perfumes, and applied makeup. Still, ostentation was frowned upon. Spartan society valued equality and uniformity, even in appearance. Decline of Sparta. Was it the women? Sparta's downfall didn't come from its women. It came at the Battle of Leuctra in 371 BCE, when the Thebans under Epaminondas and Pelopidas shattered Sparta's army. Their elite unit, the Sacred Band of Thebes, 150 pairs of male lovers, fought with unmatched discipline and courage. Sparta lost 400 of its 700 elite hoplites, including their king. The myth of Spartan invincibility was broken, but later writers, including Aristotle, refused to admit Sparta had simply been outmaneuvered. Instead, they blamed the women: too wealthy, too independent, too powerful. Historian Paul Cartledge explains, what they really feared was female power. To the male imagination, it was safer to dream up Amazons, warrior women who lived far away, than to accept that real women in Sparta wielded influence at the heart of their society. Legacy. In truth, Sparta was strongest when men and women shared power. Spartan women raised warriors, ran estates, preserved the economy, and embodied the strength of their state. Even their critics admitted they were formidable. And perhaps it was their independence, their ability to stand as equals to men, that gave Sparta its fearsome edge for centuries. Behind every Spartan warrior stood a Spartan woman who demanded nothing less than greatness. When we remember the Spartans, let's not only think of men in bronze and scarlet cloaks. Let's remember the women: mothers, landowners, singers, athletes, leaders, who made Sparta the legend it became. Because without them, there would be no Sparta.